Millionaire CEO offered her $100 million to leave. She chose what money can't buy. $100 million. Adrian's voice was ice cold as he slid the thick envelope across their marble dining table. His wife stared at the contract with trembling hands. Enough to start over, Layla. Enough to disappear. You really believe everyone has a price, she whispered, her heart shattering not from the money, but from what it represented, the complete death of the man she thought she knew. Everyone does. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Here was a woman who had loved him when he was nobody special, now being offered more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes just to vanish from his world forever. Welcome back to Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives, where love stories teach us life's most powerful lessons. To my incredible subscribers, thank you for making this channel a place where real emotions and deep truths matter. And if you're new here, you're about to discover why people choose us for stories that touch the soul. Now, let's get back to the story. Adrian Hale learned the price of love when he was 7 years old, standing in the doorway of his mother's marble bathroom, watching her clutch old photographs with trembling hands. The images scattered on the marble countertop told a story she'd spent decades trying to erase. A rundown apartment with peeling wallpaper, a young woman in discount store clothes standing beside a rusted car, a life of struggle and shame she'd clawed her way out of through sheer determination and strategic marriage. Never again, Vivian whispered, tears streaming down her face as she stared at her former self. I'll never be that pathetic girl again. Never. She didn't know her son was there, witnessing her raw terror of returning to a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty for the crime of being poor. The photographs represented everything she'd fought to escape. The humiliation, the powerlessness, the way people looked through you when you had nothing to offer. When she noticed him watching, her mask snapped into place with frightening speed. The tears vanished. The vulnerability disappeared. The photographs were hastily shoved into a drawer. What remained was cold, perfect composure. Weakness is private shame, not public spectacle, she said, her voice sharp as winter air. Remember that, Adrian. The world will destroy you if they see where you came from. Never let them see you need anything. Those words would echo in his mind for decades. Poverty meant vulnerability. Need meant weakness. And weakness meant the kind of destruction his mother had spent her life running from. The lesson grew darker when Adrian turned 12. He watched from the back seat of their Mercedes as his father destroyed the Riverside Community Center, a place that had served families for 3 generations. The demolition crews worked with surgical precision, tearing down more than just walls. They were erasing dreams. Mrs. Chin, an elderly woman who had run the after-school program for 20 years, stood on the sidewalk weeping as her life's work crumbled to dust. Children who had found safety and hope in those rooms now had nowhere to go. Sentiment destroys empires, Richard explained to his son, watching the woman's tears with clinical detachment. Mrs. Chun let emotion cloud her judgment. She refused my generous offer to buy the building, so I had to find other ways. Adrian learned later about the strategic tax increases, the sudden code violations, the carefully orchestrated pressure that forced Mrs. Chen from her own home. Within months, luxury condos rose where community dreams once lived. Power isn't about being cruel, Richard continued, straightening his tie as Mrs. Chen was led away by family members. It's about understanding that everyone and everything has a price. Find that price and you control the outcome. Never let yourself be the one who can't afford to pay. The boy watched his father's emotionless face and wondered if this was what strength looked like. If this was what it meant to be a man who never lost, never needed, never found himself powerless like the people they displaced. But the lesson that truly shaped Adrian's soul came 4 years later, when he fell for Sofia Martinez. Sofia was brilliant, the kind of intelligence that lit up entire rooms. She was the daughter of their housekeeper, Maria, and she planned to become a doctor. For 6 magical months, they met in secret in the garden house behind the Hale mansion. Sofia made Adrian believe he could be more than his inheritance, more than the cold machine his parents were crafting. You have kind eyes, she told him one afternoon as they studied together. Don't let them take that away from you. She challenged him to think beyond profit margins and power plays. She talked about healing people, about making the world better, about love being the force that transforms everything. When she looked at him, Adrian felt like he was becoming the man he was meant to be. Then Richard discovered their relationship. His father didn't rage or threaten. Instead, he simply placed a thick folder on Adrian's desk one morning, his expression unreadable. The girl's family financial records, Richard said casually as if discussing the weather. Medical debts, employment history, tax returns. Their entire existence reduced to numbers. Adrian's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Page after page of devastating debt. Maria's husband had cancer. The medical bills were crushing them, month after month of treatments they couldn't afford but couldn't stop. $47,000, Richard continued. That's what stands between the Martinez family and complete financial ruin. Interesting how such a small number can control so many lives. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Richard had already arranged everything. The Martinez family would relocate to Arizona, where Maria's sister lived. Sophia would receive a full medical school scholarship. Anonymous, naturally. Everyone would get what they wanted. Except me, Adrian whispered. Especially you, Richard replied. Because now you understand the fundamental truth about human nature. Love is just another transaction, son. Everyone has a price, even the people we think we care about. The Martinez family will take my offer because they have no choice. Sophia will leave because $47,000 matters more than whatever feelings she claims to have for you. Adrian wanted to fight, to prove his father wrong, to show that what he and Sophia shared was real. But the numbers in the folder were undeniable. The debt was real. The desperation was real. And when Sophia came to say goodbye, her eyes filled with gratitude for the anonymous scholarship that would save her family and her future, Adrian understood that his father was right. Everyone had a price. Even love. Years later, he would hear that Sophia graduated magna cum laude from medical school. She became exactly what she dreamed of becoming. A healer, someone who made the world better. And she'd achieved it by accepting money that came from breaking his heart. The knowledge that his father was right about everything, that with enough money and strategic pressure, any person could be moved, any emotion could be purchased away, turned the last warm corner of Adrian's heart to ice. If love was just another transaction, then he would become the best negotiator in the world. If everyone had a price, then he would make sure he always had enough money to pay it. The boy who once had kind eyes began building walls around his soul, brick by brick, disappointment by disappointment. He studied his father's methods with religious devotion. He learned to see people as assets or liabilities, to calculate the cost of every relationship, to measure success only in numbers that couldn't lie or leave or break your heart. By 18, Adrian could look at a family's financial records and know exactly how to manipulate their choices. By 25, he'd mastered the art of strategic destruction that his father called business. By 30, he had become exactly what Richard Hale intended, a perfect machine for generating wealth and wielding power. The transformation was complete. The boy who had once believed in love and kindness was gone, replaced by a man who understood that sentiment was weakness, that emotion was liability, and that the only reliable currency in life was cold, hard cash. He had learned his lessons well. Too well. If you've ever wondered how good people become capable of terrible things, leave a comment below. Sometimes the greatest monsters are created by the people who claim to love us most. But Adrian's story was far from over. Because while he was building his empire of ice, somewhere across the city, a young woman named Leila Santos was creating beautiful spaces where families could feel at home. She believed in love, in kindness, in the power of genuine human connection. And when their worlds collided, everything Adrian thought he knew about the price of love would be challenged in ways that would either destroy him completely or save what was left of his soul. By 30, Adrian had transformed Hale real estate into a national empire that generated billions in profit with surgical efficiency. He'd displaced thousands of families, turned entire neighborhoods into luxury developments, and accumulated wealth that most countries would envy. The boy who once had kind eyes now looked at the world through the cold lens of calculated opportunity. His penthouse overlooked the city he'd helped reshape, a monument to his father's teachings carved in steel and glass. Every morning he stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows and felt nothing. No pride in his accomplishments. No joy in his success. Just the hollow satisfaction of a machine functioning perfectly. The women in his life were beautiful, educated, and utterly interchangeable. Socialites and heiresses who understood that relationships were strategic alliances disguised as romance. They bored him to spiritual numbness with their predictable conversations about charity galas and vacation homes, but they served their purpose. They looked perfect on his arm. They asked no difficult questions. They expected nothing more than expensive gifts and social status. "You need to marry," Vivian announced during one of their monthly dinners, sliding photographs across the white linen tablecloth like a real estate agent presenting properties. "The Morrison girl has excellent breeding and her father's shipping connections would be valuable. The Ashford daughter is lovely, though her trust fund is smaller. Strategic alliances, darling. Sentiment is what destroys empires." Adrian studied the photographs with professional detachment. Beautiful faces. Impressive pedigrees. Substantial dowries. Everything his world valued, and nothing that stirred even the faintest flicker of genuine interest. Late at night in his empty penthouse, surrounded by priceless art and custom furniture, Adrian sometimes wondered what it would feel like to be seen as more than a wealth generation machine. To be wanted for something beyond his bank account and social connections. But such thoughts were dangerous weakness, quickly suppressed with another glass of wine and another review of quarterly projections. He'd successfully killed every part of himself that could feel love or hope. The transformation was complete. Then he met Leila Santos at the Grandview Design Expo. Adrian had only attended because the Developers Association expected his presence at such events. Another obligation to fulfill, another networking opportunity to endure. He moved through the crowded convention hall with practiced efficiency, shaking hands and making small talk while calculating which conversations might prove profitable. That's when he saw her. Leila was setting up a display in the corner booth, her dark hair pulled back as she focused intently on arranging her portfolio. While every other person in the room had immediately recognized him and begun the familiar dance of flattery and calculation, she simply continued working. There was something magnetic about her concentration, the way she handled each design board with reverence, as if she were arranging precious artifacts. The lighting in this corner doesn't do your portfolio justice, Adrian found himself saying, surprising himself with the words. She looked up with genuine surprise, her eyes meeting his directly. Most people either stared at him with obvious recognition or avoided eye contact entirely, intimidated by his reputation. Leila did neither. She simply looked at him like he was a person. You understand design? She asked, tilting her head slightly. I understand spaces that make people feel something, he replied, and the honesty in his own voice startled him. For the next hour they talked. Really talked. About architecture and the difference between houses and homes. About creating beauty that served purpose rather than just displaying wealth. About the responsibility that came with shaping the spaces where people lived their lives. Leila spoke with passionate intelligence about her vision for accessible, meaningful design. She wanted to create environments where families could build memories, where children felt safe, where elderly parents could age with dignity. Her eyes lit up when she described a recent project. Affordable housing that didn't sacrifice beauty for economy. Most developers think poor people don't deserve beautiful spaces, she said, her voice carrying quiet conviction. But everyone deserves to come home to something that makes them feel valued. Adrian felt something crack inside his chest, a sensation so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. She was talking about hope. About making the world better. About seeing dignity in people his industry routinely displaced and discarded. What about you? Leila asked, studying his face with unsettling perceptiveness. What drives your work? For a moment, Adrian forgot his carefully rehearsed responses about market expansion and profit maximization. He found himself wanting to tell her about the boy who once believed in kindness, about dreams that had been systematically crushed, about the hollow ache that no amount of success could fill. Instead he deflected. I develop properties. Large-scale commercial and residential projects. That's what you do, she said gently. I asked what drives you. The question hung between them like a challenge. When was the last time someone had asked him about his motivations rather than his methods? When had anyone cared about the man behind the machine? Adrian started, then stopped. He didn't have an answer that wouldn't reveal the emptiness at his core. Leila's expression shifted as recognition dawned. Wait, you're Adrian Hale, aren't you? Hale Real Estate. And there it was. The moment when everything would change. The moment when she would either begin treating him like a walking bank account or carefully distance herself from his controversial reputation. But Leila's reaction was neither of those things. Instead she looked disappointed. Oh, she said quietly, her voice carrying a sadness that cut deeper than any accusation. I thought you were just someone who understood why design matters. I am, Adrian said quickly, desperately. I am that person. She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to reconcile the man who'd spent an hour discussing the emotional impact of architectural choices with the businessman who'd built an empire on displacing families. Are you? She asked softly. The question haunted him for days. Are you? Are you still the person who understands why beauty matters, why spaces should serve souls and not just profit margins? Are you still someone who can see dignity in human dreams rather than just obstacles to development? For the first time in decades, Adrian found himself questioning everything his father had taught him. For the first time since Sofia Martinez, He wondered if there might be more to life than strategic transactions and calculated gains. He couldn't stop thinking about Leila Santos. About the way she'd looked at him before she knew his name, like he was someone worth knowing. About the passionate intelligence in her voice when she talked about creating homes instead of just buildings. About the disappointment in her eyes when she realized who he was. Most unsettling of all, he found himself wanting to be the man she'd thought he was in that first hour. The man who understood why design matters. The man who could see beauty and meaning beyond price tags and profit margins. What Adrian didn't know was that meeting Leila Santos had awakened something in him that 23 years of emotional conditioning couldn't quite kill. Something that would either redeem him or destroy everything he'd built. The perfect machine was about to discover that some forces are stronger than conditioning. Some connections transcend calculation. And some women can see straight through to the soul you thought you'd buried forever. The next morning, Adrian did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He called in sick to work. Instead of reviewing contracts and calculating profit margins, he found himself standing outside a small coffee shop in Leila's neighborhood, holding 2 cups and wondering if he'd lost his mind. The Adrian Hale who crushed communities for breakfast didn't chase after women who'd made him question his entire existence. But there he was anyway. When Leila emerged from the shop, she stopped short at seeing him. "Adrian? What are you doing here?" "Proving that I am the person you thought I was," he said, extending one of the coffee cups. "Or at least, trying to remember how to be." She studied his face, searching for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or signs of manipulation. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she accepted the coffee with a tentative smile. "Show me," she said simply. What followed were 6 months that changed everything Adrian thought he knew about himself. Leila didn't want expensive dinners at exclusive restaurants. She wanted to walk through neighborhoods and talk about the stories buildings told. She showed him her current project. A community center in an area most people in his circle would never visit. As they toured the half-finished space, she painted a vision of after-school programs, senior citizen meetings, and families gathering for celebrations. "This used to be a vacant lot," she explained, her eyes bright with possibility. The city was going to sell it to developers for luxury condos. But the community fought for it. They wanted something for everyone, not just people who could afford market-rate housing. Adrian found himself genuinely interested in her work in a way that had nothing to do with profit potential. He asked questions about load-bearing walls and natural light flow. He listened as she explained how thoughtful design could make small spaces feel expansive, how color choices could affect mood, how accessibility features could be beautiful rather than merely functional. "You really do understand," Leila said one afternoon as they sat in a park where she was sketching ideas for a playground. "Most people in your industry see buildings as investments. You see them as homes." "I forgot I could see them that way," Adrian admitted. "You're reminding me." Their courtship was a revelation. Leila challenged him intellectually in ways no one had dared since Sophia. She called him on his cynicism when it surfaced, not with judgment but with gentle questions that made him examine his assumptions. "Why do you assume people will disappoint you?" she asked one evening as they walked along the river. "Because they always do," he replied automatically. "Always? Or have you just surrounded yourself with people who confirm what you already believe?" The question haunted him because it was true. His world was populated with individuals who treated relationships as transactions, who measured worth in dollars and connections. Of course they disappointed him. He'd specifically chosen people incapable of anything deeper. Leila was different. She genuinely cared about her work's impact on real families. She remembered details about his childhood that he'd mentioned in passing. She laughed at his attempts at humor and gently corrected his more ruthless observations about human nature. "Not everyone has a price," she said one night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest. "Some things can't be bought." "Like what?" Adrian asked, genuinely curious. "Like this," she said, placing her hand over his heart. "Like the way you looked at that little girl today when she showed you her drawing. Like the fact that you spent 3 hours helping Mrs. Rodriguez fix her front steps even though you had that important meeting." Adrian had canceled the meeting without a second thought, too absorbed in the satisfaction of creating something useful with his hands. When was the last time he built something instead of tearing it down? "You're remembering who you are underneath all that armor," Leila continued. "The boy who had kind eyes. He's still there." For 6 months, Adrian lived in a world he'd forgotten could exist. A world where Sunday mornings meant farmers' market visits instead of strategy sessions. Where conversations explored ideas rather than just extracting advantage. Where he could fall asleep next to someone who loved him for reasons that had nothing to do with his bank account. He proposed on the anniversary of their first meeting, in the same corner of the convention center where she'd first looked at him like he was worth knowing. "I don't know if I deserve you," he said as he knelt with his grandmother's ring, not the flashy diamond his mother had recommended, but the simple band his grandfather had placed on his grandmother's finger 60 years ago. "But I know I want to spend the rest of my life trying to become the man you see in me." "You already are that man," Layla whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You just forgot for a while." Their wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden of the community center she'd helped design. Instead of 500 society guests networking over champagne, they celebrated with neighbors, colleagues, and friends who measured wealth and kindness rather than assets. Adrian's parents attended with barely concealed disapproval, making cutting remarks about the charming simplicity of the venue and the interesting guest list. But for once, Adrian didn't care about their opinion. He was too busy watching his new wife dance with elderly Mrs. Rodriguez, too absorbed in conversations with people whose dreams extended beyond profit margins. "Look at you," Layla said as they swayed together during their first dance. "You're glowing. I don't think I've ever seen you this happy." "I don't think I've ever been this happy," Adrian replied, and meant it. For a brief, shining period, Adrian thought he'd escaped his father's legacy. He thought love really could conquer the conditioning that had shaped him. He thought he'd finally found something worth more than all the money in the world. He was wrong. Because while Adrian was learning to be human again, his empire was watching. His family was calculating. His board was growing concerned about his changing priorities and distracted leadership style. The machine had learned to feel again. But machines, no matter how much they evolve, are still vulnerable to the systems that created them. And the Hale Empire was about to remind Adrian exactly who he really was. If you've ever had a relationship that made you believe you could be better than you are, leave a heart in the comments. But also ask yourself, when tested, do we become our best selves or revert to who we've always been? Love had won its first battle. But the war for Adrian's soul was just beginning. The pressure began before their honeymoon luggage was unpacked. "This infatuation has gone on long enough," Richard announced during their first family dinner as a married couple. He didn't acknowledge Layla directly, instead speaking about her as if she weren't sitting 3 feet away. "A temporary fascination with poverty can be educational, Adrian, but building a life around it is simply irresponsible." Vivian's approach was more surgically precise. She smiled warmly at Layla while delivering calculated cuts with the precision of a master assassin. "Your dress is lovely, dear," she said, examining Layla's simple but elegant outfit. "So refreshingly accessible. I'm sure other women appreciate that you don't try too hard to fit in with society expectations." Layla maintained her grace, but Adrian watched the subtle flinch around her eyes. His mother's words were designed to make his wife feel inadequate while sounding like compliments to anyone listening. "Layla's work is being featured in Architectural Digest next month," Adrian said firmly, taking his wife's hand. "Her community center project is being recognized as innovative, affordable design." "How nice," Vivian replied with the same tone she might use to praise a child's finger painting. "It's wonderful when people find meaningful hobbies." The board meetings grew more pointed. Members who had previously praised Adrian's aggressive expansion strategies now questioned his shifting priorities and distracted leadership style. "The Morrison deal fell through because you were unavailable for 3 crucial days," board member Harrison Phillips said during a particularly tense session. "Your assistant said you were helping with some community project?" "I was supporting my wife's work," Adrian replied, but he felt the familiar weight of judgment settling around him like a straitjacket. "Supporting your wife is admirable," Phillips continued. "But your first responsibility is to this company and our shareholders. Perhaps it's time to consider where your domestic situation fits within your professional obligations." The criticism was relentless and came from every direction. Society columnists wrote subtle pieces about unconventional matches and the challenges of crossing social boundaries. Business associates made jokes about Adrian being domesticated and pussy-whipped. Country club conversations grew quiet when he approached, resuming in whispers after he passed. At first, Adrian defended Layla fiercely. He confronted the board members who questioned his priorities. He cut ties with friends who made snide remarks about his wife's background. He held Layla closer when his mother's cruelty made her cry. But the empire was patient. It understood that constant pressure could erode even the strongest resolve. The deals grew more complex and demanding. Emergency meetings that couldn't be rescheduled conflicted with dinner plans. International calls that required his immediate attention interrupted romantic evenings. The company that had once run smoothly without his constant oversight suddenly seemed to require his presence every moment. "I'm sorry," became his most frequent phrase. "I'm sorry I'm late. I'm sorry I have to take this call. I'm sorry, but this deal requires my attention." Layla never complained, but he could see the loneliness growing in her eyes. She'd married a man who promised to be present, but increasingly she was living with a ghost who rushed through breakfast while checking emails and fell asleep reviewing contracts. The breaking point came when the Meridian District opportunity presented itself. 800 units of luxury housing, Richard explained, spreading architectural plans across the conference table. Prime real estate that's been underutilized for decades. The profit potential is extraordinary. Adrian studied the plans, noting the familiar address. "This is low-income housing. Families live here. Families who haven't maintained their properties or contributed meaningfully to neighborhood growth," Phillips added. "The market demands higher value development. These people can relocate to more appropriate areas." 800 families, Adrian repeated, thinking about the children who would lose their schools, the elderly residents who would be displaced from communities they'd called home for generations. 800 units generating premium rental income, Richard corrected. "The municipal contracts are already in place. Tax incentives approved. We simply need your signature to proceed." The room fell silent. Everyone was watching him, measuring his response, calculating whether the old Adrian, the profitable Adrian, was truly gone. "The numbers are compelling," Adrian heard himself say, and felt something cold settle in his chest. When he arrived home that night, Layla was in their kitchen, cooking dinner and humming softly to herself. She looked up with the bright smile that had first captured his heart, and he felt the familiar stab of guilt that had become his constant companion. "How was your day?" she asked, kissing his cheek. "Fine," he lied, not mentioning the Meridian contracts in his briefcase or the way his hands had trembled when he'd reviewed the displacement projections. Over dinner, Layla talked excitedly about her latest project, affordable housing for senior citizens. Her passion was infectious as she described innovative designs that would allow elderly residents to maintain independence while having access to community support. "The developers actually listen to the community input," she said, her eyes shining. "They're prioritizing dignity and accessibility over pure profit. It's exactly the kind of development that proves you can do well by doing good." Adrian nodded and made appropriate responses, but his mind was on the 800 families whose lives he was about to destroy for a profit margin that would impress his father and silence his critics. After Layla fell asleep beside him, Adrian lay awake staring at the ceiling. He could feel his old self emerging like a tumor, growing stronger with each compromise. Each moment he chose the empire's approval over his wife's values. The boy with kind eyes was disappearing again. The machine was reasserting control. And the most terrifying part was how natural it felt. How easily he slipped back into the patterns his father had carved into his soul. How the cold calculations came flooding back like muscle memory. When Layla discovered the Meridian District contracts a week later, hidden in his study among other papers, her confrontation was explosive. "These are families, Adrian," she cried, holding the displacement schedules with shaking hands. "Children who go to school here. Elderly people who've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. How can you destroy their homes for profit?" "It's business," Adrian replied, and his father's words came out of his mouth with frightening ease. "Not personal. Everything is personal. These aren't numbers on a spreadsheet, they're people's lives." But Adrian had already made his choice. The deal was too important, too profitable, too essential to proving he was still the ruthless businessman his empire required. He signed the contracts despite her tears, despite her pleas, despite the way she looked at him like she was watching the man she loved die before her eyes. That night, as Layla slept beside him with tear-stained cheeks, Adrian felt the last of his humanity crumble away. He'd chosen the empire over the woman who'd tried to save his soul. 6 months passed like a slow death. The Meridian District contracts had been signed, the families notified, the displacement process begun with clinical efficiency. Adrian watched the demolition from his office window, feeling nothing as the wrecking balls destroyed homes where generations had built their lives. The machine was fully in control now, calculating profit margins while ignoring the human cost. At home, Layla moved through their penthouse like a ghost. She'd stopped trying to reach the man she'd married, recognizing that he was gone. Their conversations became polite exchanges between strangers sharing the same address. The passionate woman who once challenged his cynicism now protected herself behind walls of her own. "I'm pregnant," she announced one morning over breakfast, her voice flat and emotionless. Adrian looked up from his financial reports, the news hitting him like cold water. Pregnant. 3 months, Layla said, not meeting his eyes. I thought you should know. She left for work without another word, leaving Adrian alone with the realization that he was going to be a father. The boy with kind eyes might have been excited, might have seen this as a chance for redemption. But the machine only calculated complications and liabilities. The final pressure came from an unexpected source. Someone's been talking to gossip bloggers, Richard announced during an emergency board meeting, sliding a tablet across the conference table. The headline read, Billionaire's Wife, From Rags to Riches Romance or Unsuitable Match? The article was vicious in its subtlety, questioning Layla's background, her qualifications, her rapid rise in social circles. It included quotes from unnamed sources about her provincial manners and inappropriate influence on Adrian's business decisions. Photographs showed her at charity events, her simple elegance contrasted unfavorably with other wives' designer extravagance. Anonymous tip, Phillips added with satisfaction. These things have a way of snowballing. Society pages love a scandal. Adrian's hands clenched into fists. Who leaked this? Does it matter? Richard asked calmly. The damage is spreading. Board members are receiving calls from concerned investors. Our reputation is being questioned. She's becoming a liability we can no longer afford. She's my wife. She's carrying my child. She's a problem, Vivian interjected from the corner where she'd been silently observing. One that requires a solution before it destroys everything you've built. The solution, when it came, was elegant in its cruelty. $100 million, Richard said, placing a thick contract on Adrian's desk the next morning. Enough for her to disappear completely. Enough to start over anywhere in the world. Enough to raise the child in comfort without any connection to the Hale name. Adrian stared at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. You want me to buy her off? I want you to solve a problem efficiently, Richard corrected. The woman has served her purpose. She made you feel human for a while, which was educational. But sentiment is a luxury we can no longer afford. The board is losing confidence. Investors are asking questions. Cut her loose before she damages us further. That evening, Adrian sat in his study for hours, the contract burning on his desk like radioactive material. He thought about the woman sleeping upstairs, carrying his child, believing against all evidence that some part of the man she'd loved still existed. He thought about Sofia Martinez, whose family had taken his father's money and disappeared. He thought about Mrs. Chen, weeping as her community center was demolished. He thought about every person who'd had a price, every emotion that had been reduced to a transaction. Everyone had a price. His father had been right about everything. When Layla came down for dinner, she found Adrian sitting at their marble dining table, his face unreadable. The thick envelope sat between them like an accusation. What's this? She asked, though something in his expression told her she already knew. $100 million, Adrian said, his voice cold as winter. Enough to start over. Enough to disappear. Layla's hands trembled as she stared at the contract, but she didn't touch it. You're buying me off. I'm providing you with an opportunity, he replied, using the same detached tone he employed in business negotiations. The money is real. The offer is generous. Take it and go. And our baby? Will be provided for. Trust funds, education, everything necessary. But away from here. Away from me. Layla looked up at him then, and he saw something die in her eyes. Not love, that had been bleeding out for months. What died was hope. The last fragile belief that the man she'd married might still exist somewhere beneath the machine. You really believe everyone has a price, she whispered. Everyone does, Adrian replied, and his father's certainty filled his voice completely. For a long moment they sat in silence. Layla studied his face as if memorizing it, as if saying goodbye to someone who had died. The contract lay between them, representing everything wrong with his world, everything she tried to save him from. Then, with dignity he didn't deserve, she pushed the envelope back toward him. Keep your money, Adrian. You need it more than I do. Don't be foolish, he said, panic flickering through his composure. This is more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. I know exactly what it is, Layla replied, standing slowly. It's the price of your soul. And you've just proven you don't have one. She walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. I feel sorry for you, she said quietly. Not because you're cruel, but because you'll never understand what you just threw away. You'll spend the rest of your life trying to buy things that can't be purchased, wondering why you feel so empty despite having everything money can provide. Layla. Don't, she said, her voice breaking for the first time. Don't say my name with that voice. The man who earned the right to say my name is gone. You killed him. She left that night, taking nothing but her personal belongings and her self-respect. The $100 million remained on the table untouched, a monument to everything Adrian had lost and everything he'd chosen instead. Alone in his penthouse, surrounded by priceless art and custom furniture, Adrian felt the hollow victory of getting exactly what his empire demanded. He'd solved the problem, eliminated the liability, proved his loyalty to the only God his world recognized. He'd also just destroyed the only real thing in his life. The machine was complete. The boy with kind eyes was finally, permanently dead. And Adrian Hale was exactly what his father had always intended him to be, a perfect instrument for generating wealth and wielding power, incapable of recognizing the difference between having value and having a price. Adrian thought he'd seen the last of Layla Santos. He was wrong. Daniel Morrison had learned early that true wealth had nothing to do with money. When his carpenter father suffered a heart attack at 52, their small neighborhood became an army of support. Mrs. Garcia brought casseroles every Tuesday for 2 months. The Singh family covered their grocery bills without being asked. Old Mr. Peterson organized a fundraiser that paid for medications insurance wouldn't cover. Young Daniel watched adults who barely had enough for their own families give freely to his, and he understood something about richness that no bank account could measure. People matter more than profit, his father told him during recovery, gesturing weakly toward the cards and flowers covering every surface of their modest living room. Remember that, son. Kindness is the only investment that always pays dividends. The lesson deepened when Daniel married Sarah, a teacher whose salary barely covered student loan payments but whose capacity for love seemed infinite. Together they built a life that looked poor on paper but felt abundant in every way that mattered. Their apartment above the Rodriguez family's bakery was small, but it smelled like fresh bread every morning and echoed with laughter from the children downstairs. When cancer took Sarah 3 years into their marriage, Daniel discovered another truth. Grief shared was grief halved. The entire neighborhood mourned with him. They brought food, shared memories, and simply sat with him when words weren't enough. Sarah's students created a memory book filled with stories about how she'd changed their lives. Her fellow teachers established a scholarship in her name. She's still here, Mrs. Rodriguez told him as he sat in her kitchen, too hollow to eat the soup she'd placed before him. Love like that doesn't die. It just changes form. By 32, Daniel had rebuilt his life around that understanding. He lived simply in the same apartment above the bakery, creating beautiful furniture with his hands and believing that every act of kindness created ripples that eventually changed everything. His custom pieces weren't expensive, but they were made with love for families who wanted heirloom quality without heirloom prices. Which is why, when he found Layla unconscious on the stairwell that December afternoon, Daniel didn't hesitate to help. She was clearly pregnant, exhausted, and alone, though her simple gold wedding ring suggested someone should have been taking better care of her. Daniel carried her to his apartment, called 911, and waited until she regained consciousness before asking any questions. "I'm sorry," Layla whispered when she opened her eyes, immediately trying to sit up. "I don't know what happened. I was just..." "You're pregnant and you fainted," Daniel said gently, offering her a glass of water. "No apologies necessary. Are you feeling better?" Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Layla would struggle with groceries and Daniel would appear to help carry them. Her kitchen faucet would break, and he'd fix it before she could call a plumber. When winter storms made walking treacherous, he'd check on her without being asked. "Why are you helping me?" she asked one snowy evening as he installed better locks on her door. "You don't even know me." "My wife used to say that kindness creates ripples," Daniel replied, testing the deadbolt. "Every act of compassion makes someone more likely to help the next person who needs it. Eventually, those ripples change everything." "You're married?" Layla asked, noticing how he spoke about his wife in past tense. "I was. Sarah died of cancer 4 years ago." "I'm sorry." "So am I. But she taught me that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It transforms into how we treat the people who come after them." As winter deepened into spring, Daniel watched Layla transform from a broken woman into someone discovering her own strength. She found work as a freelance designer, taking small projects she could complete while pregnant. Her tiny apartment filled with fabric samples and sketches, evidence of dreams being rebuilt from scratch. She never talked about her past and Daniel never pushed. But he could see the shadows in her eyes, the way she flinched when unexpected phone calls came, the careful way she counted every dollar. Someone had hurt her badly, and she was learning to trust again, one small kindness at a time. Daniel was there the night Emma was born, driving through a snowstorm to get Layla to the hospital safely. He was there when they came home, having built a crib with his own hands, oak wood, hand-carved details made to last generations. "It's beautiful," Layla whispered, tears streaming down her face as she traced the smooth wooden rails. "I can't pay you for this." "It's not for sale," Daniel replied simply. "It's a gift. For Emma." "How did you know her name?" "You talked about her during labor. Between contractions you kept saying, 'Emma's coming, Emma's coming.' Like you were so excited to meet her." Over the following months, Daniel became Uncle Daniel to Emma and something like family to Layla. Not romantically, they were both too wounded for that, but as chosen family often is, essential, supportive, and unconditionally present. He taught Layla how to change a tire and fix a leaky faucet. She helped him organize his workshop and suggested design improvements for his furniture pieces. They shared dinners and conversations, baby duties and quiet companionship. Emma's first word was "Mama," but her second was "Dan." "You don't have to do this," Layla said one evening as Daniel assembled Emma's high chair while she cooked dinner. "We're not your responsibility." "Responsibility isn't the same as choice," Daniel replied, not looking up from the instructions. "I choose to be here because you're both important to me. Family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. Sometimes it's about people who show up when life gets difficult." When Emma turned 6 months old, Layla made a decision that would change everything. "I want to tell you about Emma's father," she said one quiet Sunday morning as they watched the baby play on a blanket Daniel had woven from soft wool. "You don't owe me any explanations." "I know. But I want you to understand why I'm never going back. Why I'd rather struggle as a single mother than accept help from him." She told him about Adrian Hale. About the whirlwind romance that had felt like salvation. About the slow transformation from the man she'd loved into something cold and calculating. About the $100 million sitting untouched on a dining room table while she walked away with nothing but her dignity. "He offered you $100 million? Daniel asked quietly. "And I didn't take it," Layla said, meeting his eyes. "Because some things can't be bought. Self-respect. Integrity. The right to look your child in the eye and say you never compromised your values for convenience." Daniel nodded slowly. "Sarah would have done the same thing." "Would she?" "Absolutely. She always said that money without character is just expensive poverty." As Emma grew, so did their unconventional family. Daniel became the steady presence every child deserves. Patient, kind, consistently available. He taught Emma to walk, celebrated her first tooth, and read bedtime stories with voices for every character. And somewhere in the process of helping Layla rebuild her life, Daniel discovered that his own heart was healing too. Not replacing Sarah. Nothing could do that, but expanding to include new love alongside treasured memories. True strength, Daniel understood, wasn't about having power over others. It was about using whatever power you had to lift people up. Real masculinity wasn't about dominance or control. It was about consistency, kindness, and showing up when life got difficult. In a penthouse across town, a billionaire was about to discover that some people can't be bought, controlled, or disappeared. And that the quiet strength of genuine love was about to reshape his carefully constructed world in ways he never imagined possible. For 18 months after Layla walked out of his life, Adrian threw himself into work with mechanical precision. He closed deals worth billions, attended galas with women his family deemed suitable, and accepted congratulations on recent acquisitions while feeling utterly hollow inside. The unsigned contract still sat in his desk drawer, $100 million that had failed to buy what he tried to purchase. Late at night in his empty penthouse, staring at that untouched document, Adrian found himself asking the question that tormented him. She could have taken it all. Why didn't she? For the first time in his adult life, he was forced to confront the possibility that there really were things money couldn't buy. The thought terrified him because it meant everything his father had taught him might be wrong. It meant the machine he'd become might be broken in ways that couldn't be repaired with wealth or power. The Meridian Foundation Charity Gala was supposed to be another routine networking event. Adrian stood near the bar in his perfect tuxedo, a glass of champagne in his hand, accepting congratulations on the Meridian District development while feeling nothing but the familiar emptiness that success had brought him. "Brilliant urban renewal project," Harrison Phillips was saying. "Clean, efficient displacement strategy. The luxury towers are already 60% pre-sold. 800 families relocated," another board member added with satisfaction. "Market-rate housing replacing subsidized units. Exactly the kind of upgrade the neighborhood needed." Adrian nodded at appropriate intervals, but his mind was elsewhere. Somewhere across the city, those 800 families were adjusting to new lives in neighborhoods they couldn't afford, schools their children didn't know, communities where they had no history or support systems. The machine calculated profit margins, but something deeper wondered about the cost that never appeared on any balance sheet. Then he saw her. Layla stood across the crowded ballroom, radiant in a simple black dress that somehow outshone every designer gown in the room. She was studying a piece of artwork with the focused attention of someone who understood beauty beyond price tags, her dark hair falling softly around her shoulders as she read the placard. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. She looked luminous, confident in a way she'd never been during their marriage, as if she'd found something in their time apart that made her glow from within. The broken woman who'd left his penthouse had been replaced by someone who seemed completely at peace with herself. But it was the child in her arms that made Adrian's champagne glass slip from nerveless fingers. The crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet ballroom. Because the little girl looking directly at him had unmistakably familiar dark eyes. His eyes, and dark hair that curled exactly like his hat as a child. The child smiled at him with innocent recognition and called out in a clear, sweet voice that carried across the entire room, "Daddy!" Time stopped. Every conversation ceased. Every head turned. Camera phones emerged from elegant purses. The ballroom that had been filled with the sophisticated murmur of high society suddenly fell into absolute silence. 500 pairs of eyes focused on the billionaire CEO who had just discovered his secret was about to destroy everything he'd built. Layla didn't cower. She didn't try to retreat or pretend she hadn't seen him. Instead, she walked forward with the steady grace of a queen approaching her throne, carrying their daughter with quiet dignity while whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. "You look surprised," she said when she reached him, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. There was no anger in her tone, no bitterness, just the calm certainty of someone who had chosen truth over convenience. "Didn't you think your money could buy silence forever?" Adrian stood speechless, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in real time. Flash photography created strobe effects as society reporters captured every moment of his humiliation. He could hear fragments of urgent whispers, "That's his child. The woman who refused the settlement. She disappeared 18 months ago. You once told me I didn't belong in your world," Layla continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "That money could make me disappear, that everyone had a price. But you forgot something important." She paused, letting the silence stretch until every person in the room was hanging on her next words. "Money can't buy integrity. It can't buy self-respect. And it will never buy love." Emma, sensing the tension but unafraid, reached toward Adrian with the innocent trust of a child who doesn't understand adult complexities. "Daddy sad?" she asked with genuine concern. The simple question hit Adrian like a physical blow. This beautiful child, his child, was worried about his feelings despite never receiving so much as a phone call from him. Despite being abandoned before she was born. Despite having every reason to fear or resent him, she felt nothing but natural affection and concern. "Yes, sweetheart," Layla said softly, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. "Daddy is very sad. But some people have to learn that money can't fix everything." The crowd was recording everything now. Adrian could see his business associates' faces shifting from confusion to calculation as they realized the implications. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. "Billionaire's secret child, the woman who refused $100 million, what money can't buy." Richard would be furious. The board would panic. Investors would demand explanations. The empire he'd built on ruthless efficiency was about to crumble because of one woman's refusal to stay bought. But all Adrian could focus on was Emma's small hand reaching toward him, her eyes, his eyes, filled with innocent love for a father who'd never earned it. "This is Emma," Layla said, her voice gentle but firm. "Your daughter. The one you tried to buy away before she was even born." She turned to address the crowd that had gathered around them, smartphone cameras capturing every word for posterity. 18 months ago, this man offered me $100 million to disappear from his life. To take our unborn child and vanish so he could continue pretending that love was just another transaction, that family was just another liability to be managed. The gasps were audible now. Even in a room full of people accustomed to wealth, $100 million was a staggering sum. The fact that she'd walked away from it made headlines wherever they looked. "I want you all to see what that looks like," Layla continued, her voice carrying the quiet power of absolute truth. I want you to see a woman who chose poverty over compromise, who picked dignity over dollars, who decided that some things really can't be bought. She shifted Emma in her arms, and their daughter reached again toward Adrian, babbling, "Daddy, Daddy," with the persistence of a child who doesn't understand why her father won't hold her. "And I want you to see what he chose instead," Layla said, her eyes meeting Adrian's directly. "A man who believes everything has a price. Who thinks money can solve any problem, silence any truth by any outcome. A man who traded his family for an empire and convinced himself he got the better deal." She turned toward the exit, her dignity intact despite the chaos erupting around them. Camera flashes continued, reporters shouted questions, and society matrons clutched their pearls as they witnessed the scandal of the season unfolding in real time. At the ballroom entrance, Daniel was waiting exactly where he'd promised to be. He took the diaper bag from Layla's shoulder and opened the truck door with quiet courtesy, treating her like the queen she'd always been. "Ready to go home?" he asked gently, his presence steady and reassuring in contrast to the chaos they were leaving behind. Layla looked back once at the glittering building where Adrian's world was collapsing, then smiled with the quiet peace of someone who'd stopped running from their own worth. "Yes," she said, settling Emma into her car seat while Daniel loaded their things. "I'm ready to go home." As their truck pulled away, Adrian remained frozen in the ruins of his reputation, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he'd thought mattered. The scandal destroyed Adrian overnight. By morning the footage had gone viral. Social media exploded with videos of Emma calling "Daddy," while Adrian stood frozen in shock. Headlines screamed across every major publication. "Billionaire CEO's secret child? The woman who refused $100 million? What money can't buy?" The most damaging clip showed Layla's calm dignity as she addressed the crowd, her words about integrity and self-respect playing on endless loop. Comment sections overflowed with support for the woman who'd chosen poverty over compromise, and condemnation for the man who'd tried to buy away his own child. Within 48 hours, the board called an emergency meeting. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," Harrison Phillips announced, his face grim. "Investors are pulling funding. 3 major clients have canceled contracts. The public relations firm says this is unmanageable. Stock prices are in free fall," another member added. "Down 30% and dropping. The Meridian District project is being protested. Families are camping outside our offices demanding justice." Adrian sat at the head of the conference table, watching his empire crumble with detached fascination. The machine that had once calculated every variable with precision now seemed incapable of processing the scope of his destruction. "We need immediate damage control," Phillips continued. "Public apology, charity donations, maybe a settlement with the woman to buy her silence." "She already proved she can't be bought," Adrian said quietly. "Everyone has a price," Phillips insisted, echoing Richard's old philosophy. "No," Adrian replied, and for the first time in his adult life, he truly understood. "They don't." The coup was swift and efficient, a masterpiece of corporate maneuvering that Richard orchestrated with surgical precision. Within a week, Adrian had lost control of Hale Industries. His father, disgusted by the public humiliation, led the boardroom revolt that stripped Adrian of his position while leaving him with a comfortable trust fund but no real power. "You chose sentiment over strength," Richard said coldly during their final meeting, his voice carrying decades of disappointment. "You let that woman make you weak, and weakness destroys empires. Now live with the consequences." For the first time in his adult life, Adrian was truly alone with his choices. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum, marble floors echoing his footsteps, priceless art mocking him from the walls, custom furniture bearing witness to his isolation. The city he'd once ruled now seemed to mock him from below, its lights twinkling like accusations in the darkness. But something unexpected happened in that isolation. Clarity. Stripped of his empire and his identity as a power broker, Adrian began to see the man he'd become with horrifying precision. Every displaced family from the Meridian District. Every community destroyed for profit. Every person he'd treated as a transaction rather than a human being. The weight of it all crashed down on him at once. He started with the Meridian families. Using his personal accounts, Adrian began quietly paying relocation costs for the 800 families his development had displaced. Anonymous checks arrived to cover security deposits, first month's rent, moving expenses. When children couldn't afford their new school supplies, mysterious scholarships appeared. When elderly residents struggled with medical bills in unfamiliar neighborhoods, their debts vanished overnight. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a beginning. Mrs. Chin, the elderly woman whose community center his father had destroyed decades earlier, received a check for $2 million to rebuild her programs in a new location. The note attached read simply, "For the children who needed somewhere safe to go. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." He funded scholarships for students from low-income backgrounds, kids like Sofia Martinez, who deserved opportunities regardless of their family's financial situations. He donated to medical debt relief programs, remembering his childhood friend whose family had been destroyed by hospital bills they couldn't afford. The work brought no satisfaction in the traditional sense. No board meetings to celebrate quarterly profits. No newspaper articles praising his business acumen. Just the quiet knowledge that he was finally using his resources to build rather than destroy. 8 months after the gala that shattered his world, Adrian made a decision that would have horrified his former self. He applied to work as a consultant for affordable housing development, using his knowledge of real estate law and development strategies to create communities instead of destroying them. "Why do you want this job?" asked Maria Santos, the nonprofit director interviewing him. She was roughly his age, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of real work rather than boardroom posturing. "Because I've spent my career displacing families," Adrian answered honestly. "I want to spend whatever time I have left helping them find homes." "The pay is terrible," Maria warned. $40,000 a year, no benefits, and you'll be working with people who have every reason to distrust someone with your background." "I'm not doing this for money," Adrian replied, and meant it. His new life was radically different. He moved from the penthouse to a modest apartment in a neighborhood where people knew him only as Adrian, the housing guy. He drove a practical Honda instead of luxury cars. He shopped at the same grocery stores as the families he was trying to help. For the first time since childhood, Adrian discovered what happiness felt like when it wasn't measured in dollars or power. The satisfaction of helping a single mother find an apartment she could afford. The joy of watching children play in parks designed with their safety and wonder in mind. The peace of falling asleep knowing his work had made someone's life better rather than worse. He saw Emma occasionally, brief, supervised visits that Layla allowed not for his sake, but because she believed every child deserved to know their heritage. These meetings were awkward but genuine, with Adrian slowly learning to be a father rather than a benefactor. "Why don't you live with us, Daddy?" 4-year-old Emma asked during one such visit, her serious dark eyes studying his face. Adrian knelt down to her level, choosing his words carefully. "Because I made some very bad choices before you were born, sweetheart. I hurt your mama and I hurt a lot of other people too. But you're sorry now?" "Yes, I'm very sorry." Emma considered this with the profound gravity of childhood. "Mama says sorry means you won't do it again." "That's right. And I won't." "Okay." She hugged him briefly, then ran back to Daniel, who was building a castle out of blocks. "Papa, look. Daddy helped me with the tower." Later, as Adrian prepared to leave, Layla walked him to the door. The awkwardness between them had softened into something like peaceful coexistence. "She's remarkable," he said quietly, watching Emma through the window as she played in the garden Daniel had built for her. "She is. And she's going to grow up knowing that love isn't something you earn or buy, it's something you give freely." Adrian nodded, understanding that this was both a gift and a boundary. "Thank you for letting me be part of her life, even in this small way." "Everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were," Layla replied. "Emma will make her own choices about our relationship as she grows up. But she'll make them from a place of love and security, not abandonment or resentment." As Adrian walked away from their home, he felt something he'd never experienced in his years of billion-dollar success: peace. Not the hollow satisfaction of conquest, but the quiet contentment of knowing he'd finally learned the difference between having value and having a price. If you've ever wondered whether people can truly change, or if redemption is possible for those who've caused real harm, share this story. Sometimes the greatest victory is learning to measure success by the lives you've improved rather than the wealth you've accumulated. The boy with kind eyes wasn't dead after all. He'd just been buried under years of conditioning and fear. And slowly, carefully, Adrian was learning to let him breathe again. 2 years after the night that changed everything, Layla's design firm had grown into one of the most respected practices in the city. Her philosophy of creating beautiful, accessible spaces for real people, not just the wealthy, had attracted clients who valued substance over status. The publicity from her confrontation with Adrian had initially felt like a curse, but it had ultimately led to opportunities with families and organizations who admired her principles more than her ability to navigate high society. Her client roster now included community centers, affordable housing developments, and small businesses owned by immigrant families who wanted spaces that honored their heritage while embracing their new home. Each project was a testament to her belief that everyone deserved beauty in their daily lives, regardless of their bank account balance. "Mama, look what I made," Emma called from her corner of the design studio, holding up a crayon drawing of a house surrounded by flowers and trees. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Layla said, kneeling down to examine the artwork seriously. "Tell me about it." "It's our house, but with a bigger garden for Papa's vegetables and a studio where you can draw pretty buildings and a swing for me." Emma's enthusiasm was infectious as she pointed to different parts of her architectural vision. "And where would Daddy fit in this house?" Layla asked gently. Emma considered this with the thoughtful expression she'd inherited from Adrian. Maybe he could have a workshop like Papa, but for helping other people find houses. He could visit for dinner sometimes. At 4 years old, Emma had unconsciously designed the perfect solution, a family structure that included everyone without forcing anyone into roles they couldn't fulfill. She understood, with the wisdom that children sometimes possess, that love could take many forms. Layla and Daniel had married the previous spring in a small ceremony surrounded by friends who measured wealth in laughter, community, and shared values. The wedding was held in the garden behind the Rodriguez bakery, where Daniel had proposed on one knee among the tomato plants while Emma clapped and shouted, "Say yes, Mama." Their life together was everything Layla had once dreamed of with Adrian but had never quite achieved. Daniel was present, not just physically but emotionally available in ways that money could never guarantee. He listened when she talked about difficult clients, celebrated her successes without taking credit, and supported her dreams without trying to reshape them. "How was the meeting with the Peterson family?" Daniel asked that evening as they prepared dinner together, Emma helping by arranging napkins with serious concentration. "Wonderful," Layla replied, stirring pasta sauce while leaning into Daniel's solid presence. "They want to convert their garage into a studio apartment for Daniel's elderly mother. Nothing fancy, just comfortable and accessible." "The Peterson project sounds exactly like something my namesake would appreciate," Daniel said with a smile, nodding toward Emma. "Making space for family." Their home was filled with the kind of wealth that no bank account could provide. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator. Handmade furniture crafted by Daniel's loving hands filled every room. Fresh bread from the Rodriguez bakery appeared on their table twice a week, along with neighborhood gossip and invitations to birthday parties. Meanwhile, Adrian had quietly rebuilt his life around different values. His modest apartment was a stark contrast to the penthouse he'd once called home. The furniture was simple but well-made, some pieces created by Daniel's hands, though Adrian didn't know that. His refrigerator displayed photos of affordable housing projects he'd helped develop, alongside drawings Emma had given him during their supervised visits. His work with the housing nonprofit had evolved from penance into passion. He'd helped secure funding for 12 affordable housing developments, each designed with dignity and community in mind. His former colleagues laughed about his midlife crisis, but Adrian had never felt more purposeful. "The Martinez family got approved for the apartment," he told Maria Santos during their weekly project review. 3 bedrooms, ground floor access for the grandmother's wheelchair, walking distance from the children's school. "That's wonderful," Maria replied, making notes in the file. "You've become quite the advocate for them." "The daughter reminds me of someone I used to know," Adrian said quietly. "Brilliant, ambitious, deserving of every opportunity she can get." He never mentioned that Sofia Martinez had been his first love, or that helping her family find stable housing felt like a small step toward forgiving himself for the boy he'd once been. The supervised visits with Emma had gradually become less supervised as Adrian proved his consistency and genuine commitment to being a positive presence in her life. They met at parks, museums, and community events, places where Emma could play while Adrian learned to be a father rather than a provider. "Daddy, why do some people not have houses?" Emma asked one afternoon as they walked past a homeless encampment during one of their outings. Adrian knelt down to her level, remembering his own father's cold explanations about useful and useless people. "Sometimes people have troubles that make it hard to pay for a place to live. It's not because they don't work hard or aren't good people. Can we help them? We can try." "That's actually what Daddy does for work now, helping people find homes they can afford. Like Papa makes furniture for people who can't buy expensive stuff?" "Exactly like that," Adrian said, marveling at her ability to grasp complex ideas through simple comparisons. "Your Papa and I both learned that the best work is work that helps other people. Mama says you're learning to be good again." The words hit Adrian like a gentle revelation. Out of the mouths of babes. What do you think? Am I learning to be good? Emma studied his face with serious consideration. I think you were always good inside, but you forgot for a while. Like when I forget to clean my room, but Mama helps me remember. That evening, Adrian wrote the letter he'd been composing in his mind for months. Layla, I know I have no right to contact you, and I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I'm writing because you were right about everything, and I need you to know that your words that night changed me. I've lost the company, lost the empire I thought defined me. But in losing everything, I found something I didn't know I was missing. The understanding that you were the only real thing in my life, and I destroyed it with my own hands. Emma will never lack for anything. I've established a trust fund that will provide for her education, her future, whatever she needs. But I'm not doing this to buy my way back into your lives. I'm doing it because it's right, and because you both deserve every opportunity in the world. I hope Daniel knows how lucky he is. I hope Emma grows up knowing she's loved by everyone in her complicated family. And I hope someday you can forgive me, not for my sake but for yours, because carrying anger is a burden you don't deserve. You chose what money can't buy, and in doing so, you saved yourself and our daughter from the hollow life I would have given you. Thank you for that. Adrian Astrid. He left the letter with Emma's trust fund documentation and walked away, not expecting a response. Some gestures weren't about getting something back, they were about finally doing what was right regardless of the outcome. 2 days later, a simple text message appeared on his phone. Thank you for finally understanding. Emma is lucky to have a father who's learning to choose love over fear. Oh, it wasn't forgiveness exactly. But it was something better. Recognition that people could change, that redemption was possible, and that love could take many forms, including the form of letting go. If you believe people deserve second chances when they've done the work to earn them, share this story. Sometimes the greatest love is learning to put someone else's peace before your own comfort. The parallel lives were slowly converging toward something that looked nothing like a traditional family but felt exactly like home. 5 years after the night that changed everything, Adrian received an invitation that stopped him cold. Emma's elementary school graduation. He stared at the simple card, construction paper decorated with glitter and Emma's careful handwriting, for a long time before calling to confirm he was welcome. Layla's voice was warm but clear. She wants you there. All of us do. The auditorium was filled with proud families, their joy infectious as children in tiny caps and gowns prepared to move from elementary to middle school. Adrian found himself in the back row, uncertain of his place but grateful to be included in this milestone moment. He spotted Layla and Daniel in the third row, beaming with pride as they waited for Emma to take the stage. Daniel's arm was around Layla's shoulders, and she leaned into him with the easy comfort of two people who'd built something real together. Watching them, Adrian felt no jealousy, only gratitude that his daughter had grown up surrounded by that kind of love. When Emma stepped up to the microphone to deliver the student speech, Adrian's breath caught in his throat. She was luminous with confidence, her dark eyes shining as she looked out at the audience. In her, he could see echoes of himself, of Layla, and something entirely new, a person shaped by love rather than fear, by community rather than isolation. Good morning, everyone. Emma's voice carried clearly through the auditorium. My name is Emma Morrison Santos, and I'm supposed to talk about what we've learned and what we want to be when we grow up. Adrian noticed she'd chosen to use both Daniel's and Layla's names, creating her own identity that honored her complicated family structure without diminishing anyone's role. I've learned that the most important job anyone can have is helping other people, Emma continued, her words carrying the wisdom of a child raised by adults who live their values. My mama designs beautiful spaces where families can be happy together. My papa builds furniture that makes people's houses feel like homes. And my daddy helps families find houses when they don't have enough money for fancy ones. Adrian felt tears sting his eyes as Emma described him as Daddy without hesitation or shame, including him naturally in her family narrative. She'd grown up knowing exactly who he was and what he'd done wrong, but she'd chosen to focus on who he was becoming rather than who he'd been. They all taught me that being rich isn't about having lots of money, Emma said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. It's about having people who love you, work that helps others, and a home where everyone feels safe and wanted. The audience murmured appreciative agreement, but Adrian felt like she was speaking directly to him, the man who'd spent 30 years believing the opposite before a child's wisdom taught him the truth. When I grow up, I want to design houses for families like my daddy does, but I want to make them beautiful like my mama does, and I want to build them with my own hands like my papa does. I want to help people have homes where love lives. After the ceremony, families celebrated around them with photographs and congratulations. Emma ran up to Adrian with her diploma clutched in her small hands, her graduation cap slightly askew. "Did you hear my speech, Daddy?" she asked, her face glowing with excitement. "I did, sweetheart." "I'm so proud of you," Adrian said, kneeling down to her level. "You're going to change the world." "We all are," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Together." Later, as families began to disperse, Adrian approached Layla and Daniel carefully. The awkwardness that had once defined their interactions had evolved into something like peaceful coexistence, built on mutual respect and shared love for Emma. "She's incredible," Adrian said simply. "She is," Daniel replied, and there was no jealousy or possessiveness in his voice, just the quiet confidence of a man who knew his place in his daughter's heart was secure. "You should be proud." "We all should," Layla added gently, and Adrian understood that this was her way of acknowledging his role in Emma's life without forgetting the journey it had taken to get here. As they walked toward the parking lot, Emma skipped between all three adults, chattering excitedly about middle school and summer plans. When they reached Daniel's truck, she turned to Adrian with the serious expression she wore when she had something important to say. "Daddy, I made you something," she announced, pulling a folded piece of paper from her graduation program. Adrian unfolded it carefully to find a drawing, a house with stick figures labeled Mama, Papa, Emma, and positioned slightly separate but clearly included, Daddy. The house was surrounded by a garden, playground equipment, and what appeared to be a workshop where tiny stick figures were building furniture and helping other families. "It's our family," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "It's different than other families, but it's ours. And see? There's room for everyone to do their important work." Looking at that childish drawing, Adrian finally understood what Layla had tried to tell him that night at the gala. Love wasn't about possession or control or even traditional structures. It was about showing up, about choosing every day to put someone else's well-being before your own comfort, about creating space for people to become their best selves. He'd spent his life trying to buy things that couldn't be purchased: respect, loyalty, love. But Layla had chosen what money couldn't buy: integrity, community, and the kind of wealth that multiplied when shared rather than diminished. Emma hugged each of her parents goodbye, Daniel with the easy affection of daily routine, Layla with the deep bond of shared genetics and values, and Adrian with the careful tenderness of a relationship still being built but growing stronger with each encounter. As Daniel's truck pulled away with his wife and daughter, Adrian stood in the parking lot holding Emma's drawing and feeling something he'd never experienced in his years of billion-dollar success: complete peace. Not the hollow satisfaction of conquest, but the quiet contentment of knowing he'd finally learned the difference between having value and having a price. He might not have the family he'd once envisioned, but he had something perhaps more valuable: the knowledge that some mistakes could be transformed into wisdom, that some endings were actually beginnings, and that the most important currency in life was the one that could never appear on any balance sheet. Money had bought Adrian many things over the years: power, status, temporary pleasures, the ability to control outcomes and manipulate people. But it had taken losing everything to discover what he'd really been searching for all along: the simple, profound richness of a life lived in service to something greater than himself. Layla had been right that night at the gala. Some things couldn't be bought. They could only be chosen. And finally, after decades of making the wrong choices, Adrian had learned to choose love over fear, service over dominance, and the long, difficult work of becoming worthy of the grace he'd been given. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that true wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with the love we give and receive. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like this, stories about redemption, second chances, and the triumph of character over cash, are what this channel is all about. Remember, the most valuable things in life are the ones that money can never, ever buy. Choose them wisely, choose them daily, and choose them with a heart full of gratitude for the people who see your worth beyond your wallet. Until next time, this is Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives, reminding you that every ending is just a new beginning in disguise.